embarrassing me," he said. "Just stay home." Those 3 words. She had been turning them over in her mind for 6 days now, the way you press your tongue against a loose tooth. Knowing it hurts, doing it anyway. Stay home. As if she were something to be managed, stored away, brought out only when convenient. Thea Aldridge had spent 4 years being convenient. She had learned to read the room before she entered it. She had learned which of his colleagues made him uncomfortable when she was too loud, too opinionated, too herself. She had learned to soften her laugh at dinner parties, to ask fewer questions, to smile and stay close to the wall and not talk about the literacy foundation. She had spent 7 years building from a kitchen table and a donated laptop in a studio apartment in Cincinnati. She had made herself smaller for a man who was already filling every room he walked into with his own noise. His name was Gareth Whitmore. He was 41, a senior partner at one of the most respected architectural firms on the East Coast, and he wore his confidence the way some men wore expensive watches. Not to tell time, but to remind everyone in the room that he could afford one. They had been married for 4 years, and for the first 2, Thea had believed, genuinely believed, that she was the luckiest woman she knew. It wasn't until the 3rd year that she started noticing the way he talked about her in company. "My wife, she teaches," he'd say, with the particular intonation that made teaching sound like a hobby. Not, "My wife runs a nonprofit that has put 12,000 books into the hands of kids who never owned one." Just, "She teaches." She'd told herself it wasn't malicious. He was distracted. He didn't know how to talk about her work because it wasn't his world. She'd told herself a lot of things. He had told her about the Meridian Gala, the annual fundraiser for the city's Architectural Preservation Board, the event every serious name in his industry attended 3 weeks ago. She had started thinking about what she'd wear. She had been looking forward to it. 6 days before the gala, he sat down at the kitchen table and told her, without quite meeting her eyes, that he thought it would be better if she didn't come. The clients he was trying to impress were particular, he said. They liked a certain kind of evening. He didn't want things to be complicated. Complicated. That was the word he used, not, "I'm ashamed of you." Just complicated. She had looked at him across the kitchen table. The same table where she had eaten dinner alone 73 times in the past year. She had, at some point, without meaning to, started counting. And she had said, very quietly, "All right." She had not cried in front of him. She had learned not to do that either. She spent the night of the gala, sitting on the front steps of their brownstone in the October air. A glass of wine she didn't want in her hand, her phone in her lap, wearing the blouse she'd worn to her sister's birthday dinner, because she hadn't bothered to change out of it. She wasn't waiting for anything. She had nowhere to be. The street was quiet, the kind of quiet that has weight to it. That was when the car stopped. It was the kind of car that didn't announce itself. Matte black, no chrome, the sort of restraint that costs more than ostentation. The window came down, and the man behind it leaned slightly toward the glass and looked at her with an expression she didn't immediately know how to categorize. Not pity, not curiosity exactly. Something more careful than both. "Are you all right?" His voice was low and even, the kind of voice that didn't need anything from the room it entered. Thea looked at him. "I'm fine," she said, which was such an obvious lie that she almost laughed at herself for saying it. He didn't drive away. He looked at her for a moment the way people look at something they're trying to understand. Not intrusively, just attending. "I have a gala tonight," he said. "I'm running late and I've been dreading it for 2 weeks. A pause. "I don't suppose you'd like to be someone who saves me from having to walk into it alone." Thea stared at him. "You're asking a stranger on her front steps to a gala. You're not on your front steps the way someone is when they're having a good evening." She looked down at her wine glass, then back at him. "My name is Callum Aldridge," she said, for no particular reason, and then realized, a half second too late, that she'd given her married name. She almost corrected it, she didn't. "I know," he said, and she blinked. "You're the woman who started the Read Forward Foundation. I've attended 2 of your benefit dinners. I donated to your spring campaign." He said it simply, the way someone states a fact they have no reason to dress up. "My name is Rowan Beckett." She knew the name. She had not until this moment connected it to a face, Rowan Beckett, chairman of the Beckett Group, a real estate and development conglomerate that had its name on half the skyline east of Fifth Avenue. He had, 3 years ago, donated a building to a children's literacy organization, not a wing, a building, and declined to put his name on it. She looked at him for a long moment. "I'd need to change," she said. "I'll wait." She stood up, went inside, and stood in front of her wardrobe for a long time. She pushed past the dresses Gareth liked, the ones she'd bought because he commented favorably on them, the ones that fit his idea of who she should be in a room. At the very back, in a dry cleaning bag she'd never opened, was a dress her mother had sent her 2 years ago with a card that said, "For when you need to remember that you've always been the most interesting person in any room you've ever walked into." "I mean it, Thea. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." Her mother had been a costume designer for 30 years. The dress was deep sapphire silk, structured at the shoulder, simple everywhere else. The kind of dress that didn't try to be anything other than exactly what it was. Thea's hands were shaking when she unzipped the bag. They were steady by the time she finished her makeup. She looked at herself in the mirror, and for the first time in longer than she could honestly account for, the woman looking back was someone she recognized. She picked up her keys. She left the wine on the front step. She didn't leave a note. The Meridian Gala was held at the Aldworth House, a Beaux-Arts landmark in Midtown that had been hosting the city's most significant events since 1924. The kind of building that reminded you, quietly but firmly, that money had been accumulating in this city for a very long time. Rowan Beckett was well known there. The moment they stepped through the entrance hall, Thea could feel the room recalibrate. Not the way a room recalibrates for celebrity. The small, hungry excitement, the phones coming out. This was different, quieter, the kind of recalibration that happens when someone genuinely important walks into a space and everyone in that space knows it. He moved through the room the way people do when they have nothing to prove, which is to say, easily, without performance. And beside him, Thea moved through it too. She wasn't certain what she had expected to feel. Small, probably. Out of place. Like a woman wearing someone else's clothes. She felt none of those things, because she was wearing her mother's dress. And because Rowan Beckett, within the first 12 minutes of walking through that door, had introduced her to 3 separate people as Thea Cole. She runs the Read Forward Foundation, which you should be giving money to if you aren't already, using her maiden name, which she hadn't told him, which meant he actually knew who she was, and then stepped back each time and let her speak. Just stepped back and listened, with the particular quality of attention that is its own kind of gift. At some point, a woman named Harriet Lund, who sat on the board of the city's largest public library system, took Thea's arm and walked her toward the terrace, saying, "I've been trying to get someone to introduce us for months. Your expansion model is exactly what we've been looking for." And Thea talked, for 23 uninterrupted minutes, about the thing she had spent 7 years building, about the data, about the results, about the 73 schools that now had working reading programs, because of a spreadsheet she'd built in a studio apartment in Cincinnati. She had not talked that way in years. She had forgotten she still could. When Harriet finally pulled away to find her board chair, she pressed her card into Thea's hand and said, "Call me Monday, I'm not asking." And Thea stood there with the card in her hand, breathing in the October air coming through the terrace doors, feeling something she couldn't immediately name. It took her a moment to realize what it was. It was her old self, coming back online like a light in a room that's been dark for a very long time. She didn't notice Gareth until he was 10 feet away. He had been mid-conversation with a woman Thea recognized, had been seeing the edges of for 3 years without ever being introduced. Dark-haired, late 30s, wearing a black dress and the particular smile of a woman who knows exactly where she stands. Her name, Thea had worked out some time ago, was Isadora. She was a project director at Gareth's firm. She had been in his phone as a contact name with a work title for 2 years longer than Thea could justify explaining away. He saw Thea at the exact moment she saw him. The conversation stopped. Not gradually, completely. He stood very still. The woman beside him looked at where his attention had gone and went still too. Thea watched him take in the dress, the room, the card in her hand. Rowan Beckett, standing 15 feet behind her, with a glass of sparkling water he had brought without being asked, because he'd noticed hers was empty. She watched the color change in Gareth's face in a way that had nothing to do with the lighting. She turned back to the room. Rowan was at her elbow within moments. "Someone you know?" "My husband," she said. She said it the way you say something that used to mean one thing and now means something else entirely. He didn't ask anything further. He simply stayed close, not proprietarily, just present. She felt Gareth cross the room before she heard him. "Thea," she turned. He looked, she thought, like a man who had rehearsed a sentence and found, on arrival, that all the words had rearranged themselves into something unrecognizable. "I didn't know you were coming." "No," she said, "you didn't." He glanced at Rowan. Something moved through his face. Recognition, she thought. And then something else. "This is stopped." "Rowan Beckett," Rowan said pleasantly, offering his hand. "And you are?" Gareth shook it. "Gareth Whitmore. I'm a senior partner at Whitmore & Gage." He paused. "I believe we have a meeting scheduled for next week." "The Caldwell Tower proposal." "We do," Rowan said. And he said nothing more. Gareth looked back at Thea, and what she saw in his face was not the irritation she had expected, not the carefully managed displeasure of a man whose evening had been disrupted. It was something she had not seen on his face in so long she almost didn't recognize it. He was looking at her, not past her, not through her, not at the room behind her head, at her, the way he had once at the beginning of a different version of their story. "You look," he started, then stopped. "You look like myself?" she said. His jaw tightened. A muscle worked at the side of his face. He was a man who was very good at managing the way he appeared in rooms, and for the first time in a long time, he was not managing it. "I owe you an apology," he said. "What I said, telling you not to come." He said it the way a man says something he knows is too small for the thing he's trying to address. I was wrong." "Yes," she said. "You were." He looked at the floor. When he looked back up, his eyes were wet, and she didn't expect that. Gareth Whitmore did not cry. She had never, in 4 years, seen him close to it. "I have been an idiot," he said. "A thorough, spectacular idiot. And I have been taking the most remarkable woman I have ever known and making her feel like—" His voice broke slightly at the edges. "Like she was something to be managed." Thea said nothing. "If I had remembered for one day," he continued, "one single day, that the woman I married was someone who built something extraordinary from nothing, who—" He stopped, drew a breath. "I have wasted 4 years making you smaller. I know that, and I am sorry. I am genuinely, devastatingly sorry." The room around them had not quieted. No one was watching. This was not a public scene. It was 2 people in the corner of a very large party, having a conversation that was entirely their own. But Thea felt it anyway. The full weight of everything he was saying. The full weight of every dinner she'd eaten alone. Every version of herself she'd tucked away. Every sentence she'd left unsaid because she'd learned, slowly and without noticing, that saying it wasn't worth the trouble. She reached into her evening bag. She had packed it on instinct 3 days ago, folded it neatly, and put it in the inner pocket of her bag without quite acknowledging to herself why. The envelope was small, pale cream. A law firm's return address in the upper corner. She placed it on the cocktail table between them. "I had my attorney draw those up on Thursday," she said. "I've been carrying them around for 3 days, trying to decide." Gareth looked at the envelope. He didn't touch it. "Trying to decide what?" he asked. "Whether I still wanted to be the person I've been for the last 4 years, she said, "or whether I wanted to be her again." She nodded, slightly, in no particular direction, at the room, at herself, at the dress. She took a pen from the table beside her, a waiter's pen, the kind left near the sign-in sheets. She opened the envelope. She signed her name on the line with the same hands that had once been shaking in front of a dry cleaning bag and were now entirely, perfectly still. She slid the papers back across the table. Gareth stared at them. He didn't speak, and that was when Rowan Beckett came to stand beside her. Thea had not called him over. She had not looked at him. He had simply understood, with the particular instinct of someone who pays attention to things that matter, that this was a moment that required his presence. Gareth looked up. Rowan looked at him with an expression that was entirely calm and entirely certain, the expression of a man who holds a great deal and carries it quietly. "I want to mention something," Rowan said. "Since we'll be in a meeting together next week, the Caldwell Tower proposal. He paused, measured. My team identified an issue this afternoon. The Planning Commission has a clause, one that's been in place since the Kessler development dispute 3 years ago, requiring that any primary contractor on a project of this scale maintain what the Commission calls a demonstrable standard of professional conduct. It includes a review of their leadership's personal record. He looked at Gareth steadily. Given what I've personally observed this evening, I'm not confident we'll be able to proceed. I'll have my team send you the documentation in the morning. The quiet that came over Gareth Whitmore's face was the quietest Thea had ever seen him. The Caldwell Tower project was, she knew, had heard discussed at the dinner table for 8 months, had watched him prepare for across 4 seasons, the largest commission his firm had pursued in its 15-year history, the one that would have put his name in the conversation for the next decade. I see, Gareth said. His voice was careful, controlled, but underneath it, something that couldn't quite hold its shape. I'm sorry it couldn't be different, Rowan said, and he meant it. She could hear that he meant it, without taking anything back. He turned to Thea. Shall we? And she took his arm and they walked away. She didn't look back. Not once. She had thought she might feel something theatrical in that moment. Triumph or vindication, or the particular glow of a scene playing out exactly right. She felt none of those things. She felt, instead, as if someone had set down a very heavy piece of luggage she had been carrying for such a long time that she'd stopped noticing the weight. Later that night, when the gala had thinned and the string quartet had packed up, and the wait staff were moving quietly through the room collecting glasses, Rowan found her near the terrace doors again. She had a new glass of water and the cool night air on her face, and she felt for the first time in what seemed like a very long time, like she could breathe all the way down. How are you? He asked. I'm not sure yet, she said honestly. Ask me in a week. He stood beside her. For a while they didn't speak. The city hummed below them the way it always does, constant and indifferent and alive. I want to tell you something, he said eventually. You're under no obligation to do anything with it. She looked at him. I've followed your work for 4 years, he said. Read Forward, the Cincinnati model. The expansion into the school districts most people ignored. I've read every report your foundation has published. He said it plainly, without any ornament. I funded your spring campaign anonymously because I believe in what you're building so specifically that I didn't want you to feel obligated to thank me. I wanted you to just keep building it. She looked at him for a long moment. That was you, she said. That was me. She thought about the spring campaign, about the night she'd opened the donation portal and found an anonymous gift that covered 3 months of operating costs she'd been losing sleep over. She'd sat at her kitchen table and cried. She hadn't told anyone. You could have introduced yourself, she said. I could have, he said, but I didn't want anything from you, and introductions usually want something. She turned back to the city, the lights spread out in every direction, patient and glittering. I'm going to be in the middle of a divorce, she said. Probably for a while. It won't be clean and it won't be quiet, because Gareth doesn't do anything quietly. I know, he said. I'm not asking you to be anywhere other than where you are. She looked at him. Then what are you asking? He was quiet for a moment, the careful kind of quiet. I'm asking if I can call you Thursday, he said, and take you to dinner somewhere that doesn't require a dress code and talk about your foundation without either of us having to be impressive. And then, after that, he stopped. After that, I suppose I'm asking if you'd be willing to find out. She looked at him for a long time. The city stretched out behind him, and she thought about the pavement outside her brownstone, and her mother's dress, and the card in her hand from Harriet Lund that said, Call me Monday, and the signature she had written on those cream-colored papers with a waiter's pen in the corner of a party room. She thought, I have been making myself invisible for 4 years, and she thought, never again, Thursday. She said, yes. He smiled, not the smile of a man who has won something, the smile of a man who has been hoping for something and has found it. The divorce took 8 months. Gareth contested it, then didn't, then contested it again, then sat across a conference table from Thea's attorney and agreed to everything because there was, in the end, nothing to contest. She asked for almost nothing. She had never wanted his money. She wanted her name back, and the 4 years she would not get back, and the right to stop explaining herself to anyone. She took back her maiden name, Thea Cole, on a Tuesday morning in March, and she went directly from the attorney's office to a Read Forward board meeting, and did not mention it until the meeting was over and her board chair asked why she seemed lighter. "I am lighter," she said, "by about 170 pounds. The Caldwell Tower project was withdrawn from consideration." Gareth's firm spent several months attempting to establish alternate funding, found none substantial enough, and began, quietly, the kind of internal restructuring that happens when the cornerstone project doesn't come through. 2 of his senior associates left. A third took a competing offer. His name was still in the industry, but the sentence had changed. Present tense to past, aspirational to historical. Isadora, Thea, learned through a mutual acquaintance she'd never particularly liked but found suddenly useful, had left the firm 2 weeks after the gala and moved to a competing practice on the West Coast. She had not, apparently, looked back either. The Read Forward Foundation expanded into its 7th state the following spring. Harriet Lunn's library system became a formal partner, the kind of partnership that showed up in annual reports and press releases, and that Thea's team celebrated with a catered lunch in the foundation office. A real office now, not a kitchen table, with 4 full-time staff and a waiting list of schools who wanted to be next. Okafor, Thea's first ever donor, $68 in a handwritten check from a retired teacher in Dayton who said she believed in what the girl on the community radio station was trying to do, was given a named reading room in the foundation's new Cincinnati hub. She cried, Thea cried. The photographer from the Cincinnati Enquirer said it was the best assignment he'd had all year. Rowan Beckett came to the opening. He stood in the back of the room the way he always did, not disappearing, but not taking up space that wasn't his. He watched Thea speak with the expression of a man who already knows the answer to the question he's been asking himself, and is just taking a moment to be grateful. He had been taking her to dinner on Thursdays for 14 months. The restaurants were never fancy. He had at some point started showing up with 2 coffees on Saturday mornings, and leaving the better one on her counter with a note that said something specific, something he'd read or thought about or wanted to ask her opinion on. She had collected 14 of them. They lived in the pocket of a jacket she wore when she needed to feel solid. After the opening, when the caterers were packing up and the last board member had gone, Thea found him on the steps outside the hub. The October air was cold and clear, and the Cincinnati street they were sitting on looked, she thought, almost exactly like the street outside her brownstone the night she'd sat on the steps with a glass of wine she didn't want. A different pavement, a different person. "Can I ask you something?" he said. She looked at him. He was a man who chose his words the way other men chose investments, carefully for the long term, without recklessness. He reached into his coat pocket and held out something small, resting in his palm. She looked at it. A ring, clean and simple. A single oval stone, deep blue, the color of the dress her mother had sent her. "I bought this in April," he said. 4 months ago, I was walking past an estate jeweler on Madison Avenue, and it was in the window and I stopped because..." He paused, almost embarrassed by the simplicity of it. It looked like it had been waiting. "I wasn't going to tell you that part." "But you're telling me," she said. "I'm telling you," he said, "because you're the most honest person I know, and it would feel wrong to be anything else." She looked at the ring. She looked at him. "I'm not asking for an answer tonight," he said. "I'm asking something simpler. I'm asking if you'll let me spend the rest of my life being someone who sees you clearly, who takes up exactly the space that's his and not a single inch more, who shows up on Saturday mornings with the better coffee." He looked at her steadily. "Who never, not once, asks you to make yourself smaller." The street was quiet. Somewhere down the block, someone was playing music, the kind of music that has been in the background of the city so long it's become part of the air. Thea thought about the woman who had signed divorce papers with a waiter's pen in the corner of a gala she hadn't been invited to. She thought about her mother's handwriting on a card inside a dry cleaning bag. "Don't let anyone convince you otherwise," she thought. "I know what I want. I have always known. I just forgot for a while that I was allowed to want it." She held out her hand. He slid the ring onto her finger, and she looked at it in the October light. The same month, she thought, the same city air, the particular chill that means the year is turning, and felt something she had spent the better part of 4 years forgetting. She was allowed to feel. She felt like herself. Completely, unreservedly, unapologetically herself. 3 blocks away, in a high-rise apartment he had moved into after the brownstone was sold, Gareth Whitmore was eating dinner alone. He had seen 2 days ago a photograph on the Read Forward Foundation's Instagram. Thea at the hub opening, laughing at something someone off camera had said, a ring on her left hand that he didn't recognize, looking more alive than he could remember her looking in years. He had stared at it for a long time. He had put his phone face down on the counter. He understood, in the particular way a man understands something that has already finished happening, that the life he was living was the life he had built. Every consequence had returned, quietly and without drama, to the door it belonged to. He had no one to tell him otherwise. He was alone in the way that only men who have never learned to be present can be alone. Not in the absence of people, but in the particular silence that fills the space where something real used to live. Read Forward went national the following year. Thea Beckett accepted an invitation to speak at a Senate Education Subcommittee hearing in April. Rowan sat in the gallery behind her and did not look at his phone once for the entire 2 hours. She caught his eye when she finished. He nodded, a small private thing, the kind of gesture that needs no translation. She turned back to the committee. She had a lot more to say.